So welcome, everyone. What a great crowd. We can't see your faces, but we can see your names. And it's great to see so many old friends and current students and friends of Wick out there. My name is David Hassler. I'm the director of the Wick Poetry Center. And this is a treat tonight. It's a wonderful way to start off our 2021 series of readings and workshops this semester by celebrating our own staff members, Dr. Jessica Jewell and Charlie Malone. I mean this when I say that they are, they make my job and the work that we all do at the Wick Poetry Center so much more rewarding. They are rare combinations of engaged scholars, practicing and prolific poets, and brilliant arts administrators. And I promise you, those three combinations, skill sets and personality traits in each in one person is a rare thing and a rare find. And I feel like this is the part of the treasure of the Wick Poetry Center. So I want to just begin by saying what a treat this is to hear tonight. Both of them read each from two new books, both published by Finishing Line Press. I want to say also that our events and readings this semester is made possible by support from the Ohio Arts Council, as well as the Wick family, which endowed our program in 1984, Bob and Walter Wick, in memory of their sons, Stanley and Tom Wick. We're grateful to continue to work with our community and helping to encourage new voices for people of all ages. So tonight, this is a celebration of voices from the Wick Poetry Center. And we're going to begin with Dr. Jessica Jewell. Jessica, I believe it was 2010, but it might have been early in 11 when I got an email from Dr. Jessica Jewell, who had been a graduate Wick Fellow at the Wick Poetry Center when she was completing her MFA program in poetry at Kent State, saying she was coming back into the country from Hungary and was looking for a job. It didn't take me long to schedule a meeting at Starbucks with her. And after talking with her and finding a ways to initially bring her back into the Wick Poetry Center, it's been an incredible decade of collaborative work with Jessica. She's the author of 3 collections of poetry, most recently Dust Runner, which I hope she'll be reading from primarily tonight. This, as well as, of course, a lot of new work, but this book is available for purchase with links on her author website. She's also the author of Sisi and the Girl from Town and Slap Leather. She is the co-editor of the bilingual collection, I Hear the World Sing. As well, she's published widely in both academic and literary journals, and she holds now the position as Senior Academic Program Director for the Wick Poetry Center at Kent State, where she recently, I believe just a year and a half ago, earned her doctorate, her PhD in higher ed. So please welcome Dr. Jessica Jewell.
Thank you so much, David. I've always had a little dream about you introducing me for reading, so I really appreciate it. It's really such an honor to be doing this and to be reading as part of the Wick reading series. As David said, I've been sort of in the Wick orbit for about 15 years. So it's been a long time, and usually I'm on the other side of our programs. So I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm so thankful for everyone who showed up tonight. So thank you to you all. Charlie and I did a little rock, paper, scissors in our staff meeting yesterday, with the loser, me, having to go first tonight. But I actually have to say I'm grateful that I was the loser because I would not want to follow Charlie. I'm so honored to be reading with him. He's an amazing poet and an incredible teacher. So, I thank him for being my co-reader tonight and also an amazing colleague. And just before I start, I also want to say thank you, of course, to all of the students who work with us, who have worked with us. You make everything that we do possible. So thank you. Thank you for helping to promote this reading. And, you're always in my heart. So thank you. So, as David said, I'm going to read first a little bit from Dust Runner, which is actually my MFA thesis. So it's been quite a long time that this book has been sort of in the works. It's a book of persona poems. So it's a book that takes on essentially a whole story. And the story in this book primarily is about a family who goes from a failed coal town in Kentucky into Oklahoma during the 1930s, so during the Dust Bowl. I was inspired to write these poems because when I was an undergraduate at Indiana University, I was a photojournalism major at first. And I was always very obsessed with Dorothea Lange's photographs. And so her photos of the Dust Bowl was something that I was really interested in. Poetry is not always thought of a way to sort of examine history, but using persona is a way to do that. So you can sort of give voice to certain characters in history. And that was an interest in my earlier writing. And that is what sort of makes up this book. So I'm going to just go ahead and read sort of half from this collection and then half from a new collection that I've been working on. So the first one is called Land of Tomorrow. The night before we left for Oklahoma, I dreamed of the Shawnee mother again. Squirrel-shouldered, gatherer of angelica and pennyroyal. We sat mirrored at two ends of a still boat in the Bascombe Cumberland. She sang the forbidden songs. Cardinal feathers grew from her fingers, but the dream burned away before I could see red dancing in the air. The burial dream. I am alone beneath tarp post and wall stone, and ceiling flowers bloom from cedar. Dew covers my face. Not tears, not fog from fields, not rain. The wet of human exhale. Under that, coffined where soil is damp again. Below the crowded grass blades disowned by spring to the air, to the unscreened canvas-covered windows rising and falling chest of my sleeping child, below my longing for home. The goldenrod and wrens, the mirror-clear rivers. Below the tills, I wish to take them, or better yet, be refused at the border, back turned from the mountains and the calm laugh of the cresting wind. So one of the main characters in the book is a young girl, and her name is Leah. So she's sort of the daughter of the family, and has one of the main storylines through the book. Dust Storm, February 1934. Leah tried to bring the peahens into the cellar. She could sense the storm from the way the cattle shuffled fence to fence, trying for shelter under the balding trees. The dogs were showing teeth to stay in. But before Samuel latched the door, he tossed out the tiny birds. We can't save every living thing, he said. We could hear their terrified peeping before the dust picked the sounds clean, and the hours after their silencing were the hardest to sit through. After the storm, Leah ran to the fields. The eyeless chicks were gone. She spent days putting molasses on the tumbleweed so the near-dead calves would feed, and never stopped looking through the thistles and taproots for the birds, no matter how many carcasses of jackrabbits and field mice she had to kick through. When she did find them, their hidden bellies still unpicked by hawks, she brought them to the bucket of water I set out on the porch, washed the feathers brown clean so they would come alive in another world full of cover. When I was writing this book, one of the things I was interested in was the sort of the ecological crisis that was happening at that time. I remember sort of doing readings early on, and people would say that, oh, it's really bad. It's still really bad, and the reality is that we haven't really changed a lot of the problems that led to the Dust Bowl, the overcultivation, the sort of negligence of the land. And it's an interesting intersection between what happens when people confront their want of especially sort of the American dream with a kind of negligence of the resources. And interestingly, even though this book was written, that I wrote it, 15 years ago, these issues are still present, and there are so many things that still haven't changed. So I find that, troubling, I guess, that we're still talking about it even now, over 100 years later. Why the dust keeps coming. Because you have no taro leaves to pour over the bones, and no cave for hiding them. What use for rain charms when children drop dead from hunger in the fields? Or men from whiskey around fires? Or women, mouths filled with 1,000 spider eggs of loneliness? Who is left for chanting? How can rain come when the dead rise dry as graves? No stomach from black calf and sheep, no song for the dollar bird, or pool of water to drown a snake. Tongues dry of prayers, no spit for the sky. Dominion, 1935. Leah and I are alone on the homestead most days. If morning rises unblemished by a night of dusters, we can see the windmill past the front porch and clean geranium leaves still pink in the kitchen sill after their after-dinner washing. And no grit grates between our teeth. We walk to the barn past the thistledown fences and try to keep the turkeys alive. We all share the grains now through the cattle and horses. They get tumbleweeds if they'll eat it all. Before the sun comes hungry for the last water in the soil, I boil the roots for our meals, for man and beast are the same. There is no more dominion in Oklahoma. Every dust-torn throat is raw from swallowing. So the mother character is a character where I've used to sort of examine more spirituality, which is something that I work with a lot in my poems. And so this is a poem in her voice. Abigail goes to kill the giant. The road in the dream was the road to their Oklahoma farm, and it seemed almost clear of the day's hard dustfall. Opening in every direction were the black entrances of caves. A coolness came from their insides and slow trickle of fresh water. There was no lake and no boat, and the Cumberland River was entirely forbidden. The Shawnee mother spoke. "Where are you going, Abigail?" "I'm going to kill the giant." Abigail said the words out loud in her Oklahoma bedroom. "You cannot kill the giant." Then the Shawnee mother laughed. You are already in his belly. Ceremony. Evening hushes the farm, draws down every eyelid with the auburn sun. Shrubs, woody vines, the half-bowed gesture of the setting world. The peonies are dying, but it's summer again, and their wind-spun dance is all they know before the soil. The storms have stopped, though we've grown accustomed to the dusting, washing, clearing away. Leah still inspects every tin bucket, washing and drying twice before letting the lambs wet their tongues. Cora May nearly brushes the young mare's bald. I've become a woman of the homestead now. Will continue to braid husks and straw, tassels of sorghum for my broom. The day on this almost abandoned lane 2 miles east of the Santa Fe line will still begin and end on the front porch. I'm part of the tracks that my arms have swept into the pebble dented hickory. This is the ceremony for the land and everything in it, which we have spent years uncovering. So I'm going to read a couple, well, not a couple, I'm going to read about 7 poems now from some new work. This is a new collection. And of course, because it's the 21st day of the 21st year of the 21st century, I have to read some poems about the moon, of course. About the moon and love and fate and loneliness, but you know, mostly about the moon. Just pull these up real quick. Thank you for your patience. My students are always making fun of me that I don't have my, you know, now that I'm 40, I start to recognize my age. So my technological skills are lagging. When you leave, when you leave, everything leaves. Everything refuses. Everything has atmosphere. Everything is bound for a shadow life. Everything is its replica. Everything replaces. Everything is tenderness. Everything takes the air. Everything has cellular memory. Everything long has mountains and moons. Everything dark has a human psyche. Everything is primordial property. Everything forgets to breathe. Everything is forest. Everything east has a mouth and a sun. Everything west is howling. Everything sleeps like snow. Everything begins this evening, this wanting. Most of my work, my newer work, is an examination of my own relationship with religion and spirituality. I was raised Catholic. You know, I'm always sort of trying to find the balance between this, this sort of spiritual life and my, the way that I see the world, the way I orient myself with the world. So all of my new work is kind of tied into that Catholic language. And so that's sort of, even though it's most, I would say, okay, we're talking about the moon here, but you know, it's a lot of the sort of language that I'm familiar with, the sort of religious language, the Catholic language, the language of the body, the language of ceremony. And so that's where some of these next ones do come from. Prayer of Contrition as an epistolary sonnet. Lord, tell me the name you gave to the sun the day you made it. And why does the wind eat the prairies during thunderstorms? Tell me how many inhabitable planets there are in the universe. And are there versions of us somewhere else? And do we ever get a chance to meet our other selves and see if they made the same mistakes we did with our time? And do we have the same names, you and I? Why did you give us the moon and snow and the underground wonders we write poems about? Or do we love them because you are the moon and the snow? Or are you all things, as some say from pulpits? Do you know I once believed all the stories about you and would cry from fear? And are you fear too, Lord, as well as grace? Are you the sea? Or are you, Lord, forgive me, just the word for the sea? Love in winter, as explained by quantum entanglement. Tonight, as the light snow falls, tell yourself that you are loved, even if you are not sure. Our moon is out there, yes, and adored, but so is her twin, who is smiling in the cold, quiet, Nova pink light of another universe. No one has seen her, except in the timeless dark of dreams. She tells herself that someone loves her, a child maybe, who once fell from her ridges and floated away and is out there with happy memories of her, and everything is connected. Can't you see it now? It's so clear, like this snow tonight, and she's out there humming a song you once heard in a cathedral, and that's when you knew that love is tethered to all times, old and new, and that music is a cathedral of the faithful stars, and let's live now. Intercession, stormlight. The storm arrives again. I hear it beyond the clouds. A lost sandhill crane barking acts of moral virtues west to sea. The sky at first plumb, then pale, a supplicant drained of all blushing, who can no longer hear the voice of God through the wind. A lovelorn insomniac finally falling asleep and not dreaming of her but in absentia, like Methuselah dragging a stool across the horizon, looking for a place to rest or return to White Mountain bristlecone. A canyon of unanswered echoes, an empty spider egg dropping from a door frame onto the kitchen floor, the sound an iron gate makes shutting behind you when you leave your childhood home for the last time and someone is waving from a darkened window, a visitor from another lifetime you never kissed, or a memory begging against abandonment, that untended fire that spits, coughs, and recedes into ash. Plume ascending like the sun to troposphere, sobbing and fearful and full of light. Wildlings. The moon has returned to normal. A nothing special November moon. Not too round or bright or reeking of superlatives like hunter or harvest or super or brave or full. I was getting so sick of the October version of myself too, as if those moons were responsible. Lately, I've been getting spooked when I walk my dog at night around my neighborhood hunting for friends. I started getting frightened by leaves scuttling along the sidewalks and the chipmunks burying acorns and the chimneys exhaling their smoky sighs. I stopped telling people the truth about how I'm really feeling after the divorce and maybe stop being full and brave along the way as well. So I'll take the moon in monochrome, indistinct and almost penniless, and inspiring no poems November 4th moon. Because I even started believing my bohemian friends' social media posts about moon magic and the fairies that nibble from resting vegetable gardens. And I occasionally made wishes into the woods behind my apartment building, but became paranoid that something was actually listening. I know wildness is a human construct. I know we invented harm and the monsters that cause it. And we also invented the fear that we're always running hard away from facing. But I have to tell you, the other night I heard something singing, "Oh, wildlings, come out of the woods, it's safe now." And it wasn't the moon. Prayer of adoration, akin to astronomical transit. And I said to the star, "Consume me." Virginia Woolf. At meridian, the friar plum passes between my hand and your mouth. We use the passing to tell times in stages of ripening. Time, we think, is measured in the pull of flesh to clingstone. A taste, you ask? Your tongue spilling out words soft as moonlight on a tranquil lake. Ephemeral emptiness is not filled with years, but with the desire to see one body overlap another body. Alone, we are no more than air, carbon, neon, remnants of galactic dust from the first starbirth. We find the missing origins in the single breath our mouths share, consuming. We saw the distant observers once, but did not know the visible light was the light of our future selves. Taste this plum from my mouth. Is it not sweet? Yarrow, yarrow. We lose connection to the day. It is September now in Ohio, so it must be the season of sorrel and goldenrod. I love you. Chicory, I love you. Thistle and evening primrose. We are eye level with the wind when spreading our seedlings and won't stop. Women of heartlands and uprooted wood nettles, I love you. Wingstem, I love you. We smile the time away, make laughter the salve for loneliness. Helianthus, I love you. Horseweed, I love you. We quilt a future together as symmetrical as a garden phlox, I love you. And oxeye daisies, I love you. One of us ferries a body to Summerland, one sleeps in an autumn field hungry for honey, and yarrow, yarrow, I love you. Okay, so this is my last one. I don't know how I am on timing. I timed myself earlier. I think we're good. This is called Psalm in the Pandemic. And I have to say, it started as an assignment from Charlie and Carrie. We're doing, they're collecting a poetic inventory for the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Everyone's writing, poems about items that are found in our incredible national park here. And my assignment was dewberry. And this poem started like entirely about dewberries. Charlie and Carrie, forgive me, it was all about dewberries. But after about 150 revisions, it's become less about dewberries, but dewberries are still in the poem. So I'm not sure if it qualifies, but we'll talk about it later. I'll try to make an argument to include it. Psalm in the Pandemic. In the kitchen, in my kitchen, in the afternoon light in your hair, in a black dog at the lake, in the nibbled willow branches at Beaver Marsh, in the God of animals, in momentum, in the oldest of the gods, in the subtext of the translation, in your favorite love poem, in long lines at the grocery store again, in the brand of tissue you hoard, in the gold stores under the earth, in the early stars, in the stars that left us here, in the leather and gold you leave in my bed, in some trouble with trajectory, in the west settling wind that moves us to kiss, in the God of wind, in the cold and warm pains and penitence, in the valley and the park, in the dewberry in the belly of the blackbird, in those berries you grew your first summer, in memories missing I, that never read you for what you needed, in the need, in the easing of the pressures now, in the cures for all scourges, in the God of cures, in the warm light of God. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. My goodness. Such beautiful poems. So wonderful to take this pause to hear you read tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
The chat is an avalanche of chats right now. A litany. Wow. Well, thank you. And we're going to hear now from Charlie Malone. And before I read a brief bio for Charlie, I just want to say that what Charlie pours into his work in the community, as so many of you know, so many of the students here tonight, the community members, in his work as outreach, program and outreach with Wick, he pours also into his poems. And that is an incredibly rigorous intellect, a deep passion, and a poet's heart that can build bridges from one person to another in a moment. And so many of our students who, before the pandemic, walk into the Wick House and straight up to Charlie's office. And when they sit down, they're home across from his desk. So as I said at the beginning, it is such an honor and a gift to have both Jessica and Charlie working at the Wick Center and to work with them on a daily basis. Charlie grew up in Northeast Ohio and headed west to the Rockies for where he did his MFA in poetry and started doing work in the community out there at Fort Collins, Colorado. He has a full-length collection of poems that he'll be reading from tonight, along with some new work, Working Hypothesis, that is available on his website for purchase, along with a chapbook of poems called Questions About Circulation. Both of them came out within a 10 to 12 month period. And this, his chapbook is published by Driftwood Press, part of the Adrift Chapbook Series. He edited out in the Rockies a collection called A Poetic Inventory of the Rocky Mountain National Park with Wolverine Farm Publishing. And as Jessica mentioned, working on this super cool project with the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, creating a poetic inventory here in Northeast Ohio. He is our program and outreach manager, and please welcome Charlie Malone.
Thank you, David. That was generous. And Jessica, I think I actually lost that game of rock, scissors, paper today or yesterday. But thank you to everyone at Wick, Carrie for making the tech things happen in the background. Jessica, it's really just a pleasure to read with you. I just admire your work so much. When I get the time to be alone with your words, there's such a precision and a word choice that just makes me want to write. But part of it is because you do things that I can't, and that are so different from the way mine works that I get excited. I also want to say thanks to everyone who's here. You know, there's so many friends here on the participants list, so many great poets. I'm just glad you all showed up tonight. For many of us, this is the beginning of our academic semester and perhaps the hardest time of year to think of taking on anything extra or spend any more time near a screen. But here you are, and I'm really grateful. I'm going to open with a poem called Resume. It's perhaps a good way to introduce myself a bit more and where some of these poems come from. Here it goes. Resume. The job was to cut the grass, trim the hedges, pull the weeds. It was to scrape the paint, then paint the paint. It was to cover the naked paper with ink or graphite, words and images from nothing. to place the washing machine on a dolly and lower it down the stairs. I was paid for a week's training to go door to door as a census taker, but I was never sent out to take the census. The job was to dip a plastic cup into the water over and over, counting mosquito larvae before poisoning them. I swept the halls and cleaned the courtyard. The job was to write down carefully what she wanted to do with her life. Some days I had to ask the students why they drank in the dorm, even though I knew why they drank in the dorm. Hearing about sexual assault is difficult, but not the most difficult. To clean up the trail of blood at 3 a.m., the job was to call for the 72-hour psychiatric hold. It was to run the string trimmer along the outside of the penguin enclosure and the whale tank before the park opened. I was discouraged from rhyming or using the word soul. Pull the sap buckets from the cold taps and dump them into the horse-drawn cart. Chuck the bales of hay in the wagon as it bounces over the ruts in the field. Hold this rope, and when I cut through the trunk of the tree, you have to pull hard in that direction, away from the house, then run. The job was to read 100 collections of poems and decide which were the best. That day we rode out to the wolf sanctuary and had our faces licked and wrote a story we never published. Each morning, I grabbed 3 to 6 homing pigeons and took them up into the canyon with me while I shot photos of whitewater rafters. The birds carried the images back. I have to keep my lesson plan in my head when I go through the metal detector and walk past solitary confinement. I have to catch the bird, the bat, the squirrel loose in the apartment building. I rode my bike north of town at dawn to harvest vegetables and listen to people hum to themselves. You don't take off your clothes and you don't get wet. 36 jets of warm water massage your body from head to toe. I was not cut out for retail. She is working on her English, putting her life into words, and I just listen. We were building trail high in the canyon, and everywhere the beetle-killed trees were ripe for wildfire, and other duties as assigned. A lot of this book has a sort of ongoing conversation with science. My mother was a chemist, and these poems, when they're at their best, I think engage with science from a place of wonder, sometimes play, sometimes with doubt. This particular poem comes from one of those experiences you have at an early point in your life and sort of opens itself to metaphor later in life. I believe it was actually my birthday and we were going out to dinner and my mother came home just stained purple like a bruise from a chemical spill at work. It was a chemical that was designed to react to living tissue in the body so surgeons could distinguish it from the living tissue from the dead tissue. And that's the idea sort of behind this poem called In Vivo. It's for my mother. There's the lab, and there's the lab I imagine you working in. Those flasks and beakers marked with milliliters, liquid, bubbling, bleach aroma. There is the lab that sells biological buffers, reagent biochemicals, in other words, purity and glow. In other words, poetry. Life fluoresces, enzymes produce, and they change everything. You make a chemical that reads the way I want to, and come home lit purple. An accidental spill. By design, living tissue activates a dye. Alive, 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 each splotch asserting, reading as if there was an analog. A way to cover a stanza in an agent that would show us which parts breathe. Horace wrote about reading a man to death. Here, the chemical opposite. In death, the cell tissue's ash, structures reduce to inky carbon, even illumination ends. I'm going to try to show an image of a bug. I'm a person who really I have to be physically active. I have to be doing things with my hand a lot of the time, and that certainly comes into my work a lot. And this next poem is a love poem of sorts with a giant bug. So I'm going to try to share the bug while I read the poem. That's not the right one. All right, we will skip the bug sharing. So hopeful about that. Let me see. Well, now it's going to cooperate, but you can't see it. So we'll just forget it. Who doesn't love Zoom? All right. So the poem is called Beneficial Insects. And again, if you've never seen a picture of a Dobson fly, you absolutely, if you're near a machine, should Google an Eastern Dobson fly right now. They're huge and somewhat frightening. And here is that poem, Beneficial Insects. I want you to look at me the way you look at the Eastern Dobson fly, like I could bite your finger right off. Though I can't, or like I was once a Helgramite, an alien child, like my biology has its own rules, which it does, and we know this. I want you to look at me with interest when I lean in for a kiss in a cinematic shaft of light under Breakneck Bridge, our wet bottoms on a mossy boulder below the waterfall. Downstream, a fisherman and his daughter turn stones looking for bait. Pure water clouds with their disturbances. Don't look at me like I am a pure stream, you say, like I am hiding life in my shadows. All right, let's fix this piece real quick. I always try to make it too fancy. All right, so the next poem, there are a couple of ideas in the book that kind of come from scientific hoaxes. So I spent a lot of time researching them. They're playful, they're beautiful, they're strange, absurd, and sometimes egotistical. Somebody wanting to insert themselves into the story of science or into history or into some sort of list of who discovered what. And there's a lot of ego in that. So I'm going to share a couple of them, a couple of poems inspired by these hoaxes. One is about a fabricated butterfly where somebody simply painted the wings of a specimen that was already known and sent it in to claim they discovered a new species, and we believed they had for a while. There are other poems in here about man-eating trees, about plants that turn into animals. So I'm going to read just a couple in a row from here, and then we'll have maybe a moment of audience participation. But this is Papilio Eclipsis. It's my butterfly poem. It goes like this. You are out in the garden, though you are never out in the garden. I catch you, black paint still wet and cool against your fingers. One of our common yellow butterflies, adorned. You call it a new species, call this an enlightenment. You have given birth to a counter-narrative, how we grow and how we know, a CRISPR process, a laugh at Linnaeus, one thing covers another. We pin the poor specimen to a board, to the wall, adorning. Above the photo of your father, beside a small airplane, numbers and spots painted on the wings. Next one is called Jokes of Nature, Jokes of Knowledge. There's been a lot of sort of work by people who spend time with these strange things to sort of categorize them. And so in this one, there's sort of a list of some of these ideas. Some of it too is just the idea of mythical creatures sort of get blurred in with this. And so that's part of it too. But yeah, I'll just get right into the poem, enough talking. Jokes of nature, jokes of knowledge. She and I look out over our backyard, choking on cottonwood fluff and possibility. We want belief, or we want to play. We might say or make something out of feathers, scales, and myths at the edge of what we can know, that fills both the cup of possibility and the cup of knowledge at once, pleases all nine little goddesses and entertains neighborhood children. We can make anything. Egg-like, magnolia-sized blossoms releasing soft white mice from limbs, smelling of lavender, and citrus, fingers through fur. Feel the feet rumble as a troika of 6 half-ton, half-fish, half-horse, noble beast drag our chariot across the sands of Libya. If not children, why not wings? Or a moon of Neptune? Or the dark lightning of memory? Why not the giant of Cardiff or the shroud of Turin? Peasant farmers harvest the rich yield from the spaghetti trees in the early Swedish spring. What's the difference between hoax and jokes, when in some languages the initial letters have the same pronunciation. Cover us in gold or marble. This next one is called Truthfully. I am as we are, skin wrapped around skeletons of mermen, misfits made hopefully, lovingly, 27 bones in each hand might have been relics, bits of Buddhas and saints, you, the King of France, the book in your hand, fiction by fiction, a kind of magic mirror. The better part of the world is built on lies, might be cataloged, color-coded. There are 6 types of lie: up, down, strange, charm, bottom, and top. Hoaxes are antiparticles to aggressive in curiosity, a synonym for masculine, antonym to safety. We could talk about violent sports or food alternatives, antithesis to business as usual, people exercise, create curiosities, anti-up and puzzle each other. This is and isn't some degree of arrogance, some grave play. So now is our moment of audience participation. I want, let's see, actually I've lost the chat. There it is, okay, good. So I want to read one more from the series, but I want you to vote as to whether or not it will be a poem about a typo in an encyclopedia. So if you want the typo from the encyclopedia, you will type 1 into the chat. Or if you want a poem that involves half plant, half animals, this category of things that do not exist called zoophytes, type 2. So 1 for typos, 2 for zoophytes. I'm going to trust Carrie to tell me which is winning. It looks like number 1. So hard. The lamb drawing, I would love to share the lamb drawing if the shared screen thing was something I could master right now. All right, 1 is winning. We're going to go with it as opposed to stalling indefinitely. So the title of this one is Latin, which I always feel sheepish about. It's Edicula Ridiculi. But it turns out there was a temple described in an encyclopedia where they misspelled it. And so people then made up a story to address, word nerd forever, yes, David, made up a story that sort of erased the misspelling. So it became the Temple of Ridicule. And the idea then became that the temple was built in mockery of Hannibal when he tried to capture Rome and failed, that this was a temple that was laughing in his face. But it just turns out that it was a typo and it had an entirely different name, which meant something else. But for a while, that became the story. That mistake propagated and spread and was justified and explained. And I think that's interesting. Not that we're in a post-truth moment, but I think the seeds of doubt are an interesting thing. Sometimes they're generative, and that's kind of beautiful. So here it is. My mother opts for the encyclopedias to come all at once. Then each year a matching addendum, newly minted authority bound in cream, pine green, gold accents, smooth paper, glossed colored images. In the attic another set, Britannicas, 1912, onion paper, 8-point type. This reach a costly aspiration, expensive breath. Yes, she says, an investment in us. Subjects to this abundance at night, perhaps just 1 letter, or just half of 1 letter, a sliver of volume. Bullfrogs sing in a chorus around the pond. Lightning bugs, Ling Shang, Liège, ligature. L did not have an entry for laughing while playing kickball on dusty infields, nor S the spades cutting sod into shovel-wide squares, holes the shapes of books, filling with worms and childhood memories, or the memories you want to give to others' children, or the mud on your hands that you want to wipe down, the smooth forearms of a friend, ridiculously luminous all at once, in the cool contact where you tell a fact about dreams, about dredging machines, about Dresden, and they tell you theirs, or you make new ones together, an approximation of history for the new sultans of Zanzibar. You sternly walk towards the stern of the dreadnought, its great steel hull towering above the water. fat shadows of 10-inch guns, uniforms uncannily repeated. Then, when it is safe together, you make an entry into the altar of the god of laughter and joy in the temple of ridicule, which stood on the authority of its stone foundation just outside the gate where Hannibal gave up his siege, until we learned it was a typo in the encyclopedias. So that's that section. I'll do a couple from the last part of the book and then maybe 2 new ones to kind of wrap up. There's often a boundary between my own writing and the work I do at Wick. But I love this next poem because it broke right through that boundary. And that was an exciting and uncomfortable thing for me. And it came out of the project we were doing where we were talking about the history of the Cuyahoga River and taking kids on hikes and telling them that we had set our river on fire many times. And this was in the 50th year of the last major fire before we had another one in 2020. Thank you, 2020. About the river. I've been talking to kids about the river the way you talk to them about sex or drugs or American history. By that I mean in a classroom. The kids have been talking too. One girl told me she went everywhere in a kayak when her dad didn't have a car. And I said there's a long history of that. Usually they ask, how could water catch on fire? I want to spin it like a magic trick, like wine or rabbits, say something French. But I stick to a truth and tell them that if they really want to, they can set the river on fire again. They ask, what will happen to the turtles if the river catches on fire again? Ah, I say that is a very good question. And then we find words that rhyme with flood. What then would the deer drink? Or anything with a mouth? The last part of the book is interacting with this other book, which I conveniently stashed behind me. It's full of these weird, it's science tricks and experiments that was upside down. I'm not standing outside. Well, we'll leave the politics out. It's also full of these delightful images and weird illustrations. They're super, super quirky and strange. And some of these are very involved and some of them are goofily minimal. And one is to turn off a light bulb in a dark room and then you can still see it. That's the whole experiment. I don't really know what that is. But yeah, so it plays with these ideas. And so I'm going to read 2 from these. The first one sort of takes one of, I don't know if it counts as an experiment, but it has the idea in there that probably a lot of us grew up with, where you count the time between a lightning strike and thunder to measure the distance of a storm. So that's listed in here as an experiment. And I was thinking about that particular action, and 2019, we were so lucky to have Sonia Sanchez on campus. And I was thinking about the way she talked about history to us. And at the time, we were really working to honor the 50-year-old history of our wound here at Kent, of the shooting on campus. So this tries to do all of those things in one poem. You can tell me in the question and answer later if it's successful. How far the storm, December 2019. The news is about storms on the horizon, except for the weather segment, and a story about mass graves in Tulsa being probed with radar. That story is about an eternal storm, like Jupiter's red eye. It is about shooting vibrations into the earth to find the hollows. It's the kind of rain that a white kid like me was sheltered from. But we can see it now, like we can see that lightning strike in Philadelphia in 1985 that hit 61 homes, and the firefighters kept idle. In 1985, we were old enough, but never told. We can see it now. Sonia Sanchez points at our 50-year-old wound, Kent State, calls it the same, calls us brother and sister. We can count the seconds between explosions. We can feel them in our teeth. Even as one voice says, a storm is coming, another says it isn't. When I was young, I thought the rain fell in such a generously democratic manner, eyes closed and counting Mississippis. The next one I'll do, or the last one I'll do from this section before some new pieces, is called Mirror Tricks. It's just a simple, weird poem, but there's some mirrors sort of throughout this reading, and I want to keep that theme going. Mirror Tricks. Light goes in all directions, directly to your blue eye, to the mirror, indirectly to your blue eye, to the mirror, and mirror, indirectly to your blue eye. The face is both the face and the reflection of the face, the reflection's reflection of the face. Incident impinges. Incidents impinge. Lay a piece of glass on black paper, shine your light, double the world. Your world reflected in the child's blue eye, your world bent in her brown eyes. Not a reproduction, a future, bent and diffused, invisible lines crossed, invisible lines extending into the invisible visible. Before I came to Kent, I was working at a school where one of our strongest programs was our optometry program. And I'm still in touch with a lot of those students. And this poem is sort of inspired by conversations that I had with some of them and the work that they do in the labs. One of the things that went into this book was a lot of like, what do you do in your lab? Show me your lab. And so this is called On the Grinding of Lenses. Oh, and I should say, I'm about to read 2 new poems, and I always tell my students, if you have the opportunity to read your work, as scary as it is, share something you've never shared before. And so that's what I'm going to do with these next 2 poems. And this is the first of those. On the Grinding of Lenses. In optometry school, she learns in optometry school, she learns the properties of glass and light, how to bend and break, to coat clear and wax, then black pitch, polish our curves. This is how we saw the galaxies, how we are able to read long after our failing eyes began their journey into plasma, how we could bring a ship from the horizon near, or by flipping the binoculars, take an angry sibling, make them far and small, send them into space. She learns light's quickness. We see first, then we hear. Brightness might mute, loudness might edit or revise. She keeps a mirror that stretches her hips and shoulders like a gourd. Another folds her into herself, a pencil or a black hole. Not so secretly, she loves that she can make herself fill a space or disappear. The last new poem I'll share is strange, and I'm going to share the strange poem because that's my right as the reader, but I'm also going to share it because it's inspired by Maj Reagan, who was one of my most important teachers and who passed away in 2018. And I don't know that I've ever met anyone more vital to our poetry community here in Kent than Maj. Recently, in much to my surprise, I received a letter he sent me more than a decade ago. My address is frequently changing when I lived out west, and it didn't find me, but it found me recently. And in it was a poem, and so the title of the poem comes from his poem. I do believe that that letter found me when it was meant to. So it begins with this quote from him. I was delivered into this world with the dragon's egg nestled in my breast. Also, this poem interacts with this fresco from Florence that we were researching when we were doing some work with our Florence campus. It's called The Miracle of the Dragon. So there's this connection between those things happened at the same time. So I was delivered into this world with the dragon's egg nestled in my breast. I know, both a quote and a title from a 14th century fresco when all you want to see is the dragon, all flames and wind. When the dragon makes his home in the ruins of the old city, someone wakes the holy man, who pulls on his red coat against the crow-colored night's cold and takes up the work. With silk thread, he stitches the creature's mouth shut, revives one dead man to stroke a salt and pepper beard, smooth the wrinkles of his saffron robes. The other, wrapped in his fine coat, kneels beside his friend in prayer in the night. Everything we do is cast against the backdrop of a more glorious version of the city we live in. For every kindness, there's a pope claiming he defeated a dragon and cured Constantine of leprosy, tugging at the gold embroidery of his red coat. Right here, on this spot, it happened, patron lies to painter, so we never forget the false flames, and artwork is commissioned. We won't forget, walking home, wrapped in wine, ascending from the pit, walking over crisp leaves like shells, threading the words of our teachers through the teeth of the city, carrying the eggs of dragons in our chest. I'll finish there. I think we still have a little bit of a Q&A ready to go. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening. Jessica, it was really a joy to read with you. Thank you all for coming out. I'm going to let other people talk while I'm still here.
Thank you, Charlie. What a beautiful reading. Wow. What a night. Wonderful. And I want to thank Carrie George, who can turn her video on for a moment so that you can see the stage manager to all this magic this evening of all these poems. Also a wonderful poet, our graduate Wick fellow, Carrie George. And like all of us, wears many hats at the Wick Center. So thank you, Carrie, for managing this reading tonight so we could hear these voices. Do we have some questions that we can send into the chat for Charlie or Jessica? A lot of praise, Charlie. A lot of people sending you love. Well deserved. Katie says, Charlie, I love your curious, pensive, playful mind and how it wends its way through the prairies of poetry. Thanks for these poems tonight.
Wow. You all are too much. I'm trying to catch up on the chat, which I hid while I was reading.
Mary Jewell, who we were going to elevate to be a panelist, were threatened early in the evening, sent a note to thank you, Jessica and Charlie. So enjoyed your readings.
I think my mom might have a little crush on Charlie. So.
Doc, Jessica and Charlie, without would you any reflections? I mean, just any conversation that you'd like to share, some thoughts. I feel so filled with your poems your in this evening. Shannon says, I'd love to hear from Jessica where the interest in the Dust Bowl came. Great question.
Oh, well, thank you, Shannon. So when I was an undergraduate a millennia ago at Indiana University, which is a great journalism school, and I went for photojournalism, and I got really obsessed with Dorothea Lange, who was a wonderful photographer of that era, a great documentary photographer, and a part of what I was always really interested in from really kind of early in my 20s was this way that she was able to capture a story without any words. One of the big influences on my Dust Runner book was Jean Valentine, who actually just passed away a few weeks ago, very tragically. Well, I say tragically because she's like a titan. I mean, she was old, she had a wonderful life. But her writing was about I think some of her most revelatory writing was about capturing the unsayable. How do you write something that the English language is simply incapable of conveying? And so we look to other mediums for that. And one of the medium that I really have always been very obsessed with is photography. I love portraiture, I love nature photography. So the interest in the Dust Bowl comes from those photographs, from those the government, can you believe the government paid artists, photographers to go out and capture people's stories, to capture sort of the way that people's lives, how they were affected by the Depression and these disasters. And so my sort of thought process was, how can I do it in a poetic form? And so that's why the book comes from those moments. That's where it really started from, and it's been almost 15 years.
Jessica Regis, along that topic, sent a question in the Q&A. Is it a strange process to have your thesis published? And it sounds like you've been away from those poems for a while, but what is that like?
You know, the truth is that those poems are from when I was 25 and 26 years old. In a way, it's like writing a play. You know, it was a work of the time, of my life at the time. So when I read my new work, it's much more reflective of the way that I think about the world, the way I orient myself toward the world now. I'm so, happy that work, the MFA thesis, was published, and that I can sort of, have these opportunities to read from it. But in some ways, it's like reading from another version of myself. So yeah, it's interesting. You change. All artists adapt and evolve over time.
Charlie, you did such beautiful work with river stanzas, and then Poets jumped into the Poets for Science project and took it to Vanderbilt University. And now your poetry and your passion, both with a kind of eco-poetics, with nature, but also with science and the very title, Working Hypothesis. I'd love for you to comment on the quote from Jane Hirschfield, who curated the poems from Poets for Science, with the quote, "The microscope and the metaphor are both instruments of discovery." And how, for you, tell us about your passion and this sort of questing through science and building metaphors out of science, and share with us.
I mean, some of it was growing up in a rural place before the internet was really a thing, in a house full of books. My mother was a chemist who was very interested in veterinary medicine, so there are books with acetate sheet layers of the systems of different animals' bodies, and she would bring home things like test tubes full of Venus flytraps that we would then try to grow in the basement because her work was getting rid of them after an experiment. And so there was always this scientific curiosity in the house, and a lot of Christmas gifts were always themed around oh, grow your own crystals or do this. And so I just grew up sort of unsupervised with lots of scientific toys. But maybe speaking more directly to Jane's quote, that curiosity behind both ways of knowing, whether it's creating art or trying to understand the physical universe in a very specific way. In recent years, there's been this anti-curiosity or anti-intellectualism, or these trends to insulate ourselves with ideas and facts that might not be facts, but are comfortable. And so I wanted this book, in a sense, to be a celebration of curiosity, a celebration of using our intellect, a celebration of that history of the world, but not in a dry way, in a playful way, and in a complicated way. I didn't want it to be, science is great, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, but something much more slippery than that, I think, was where I was at.
Wonderful. Carrie George sent a message, a question that was a question for both of you. How is writing your chapbooks different from your full-length books, or was it different for both of you? Do
you want to rock, scissors, paper on that, Jessica?
Let's just assume I lose. So should I go first?
You can go first. I'll follow up. Yeah.
So my chapbook came later than the first book. This is my second chapbook, and I have, up until more of my recent work, worked in these sort of projects, these historical projects. So my chapbook is Sisi and a Girl from Town is a book of poems, persona poems from the voice of Queen Elizabeth of Hungary, who was a beloved queen in Austro-Hungarian Empire and was assassinated. She was killed She was stabbed by an anarchist in Switzerland. And, you know, the process of writing the books was the same, in the sense that for me, I start from a historical moment and try to understand the voice of the moment, and then try to find the sort of mundane, the very finite things that happen in someone's life, and write poems from those moments. So in a sense, it was exactly the same as my full length. So yeah, I guess that would be my answer.
I don't know that my answer is much different from that. My chapbook, which I can model questions about circulation, was, oh, I hate self-promotion. It makes me so uncomfortable. Was a lot of the poetry I wrote right after my thesis. So you finish your thesis, you begin to step out of that community of nurturing, excited writers, and you have to figure out on your own. You have to sort of refine your compass and what you want to do with your writing, and of all of the things that you learned and experimented with, what do you want to keep? What will become part of your writing going forward now that you aren't turning it in on a regular basis? And so these poems started from that sort of critical distance while I was still living in Colorado, which was a place that was booming. You know, the population in the city was growing by quite a bit. It was changing all the time, and it felt like everything was possible. And when I'd come back to the Midwest, to the Rust Belt, it was very different. People were leaving, the cities were shrinking. There wasn't that same sort of energy. And part of it too is you get 300 plus days of sunshine in Fort Collins, and I think 3 in Ohio. And so I began writing sort of from that distance of what it was like to grow up in the Midwest and what it was like to grow up on a farm. And then in the process of doing that, I moved back. And so it became this sort of like, I thought I'd left a place, but now I've come full circle. And what does that mean? What does that mean to my growth, my development, my relationship to my family, to the world itself, to the land? And so this is a very like farmy Ohio book. And it's very different from the other book. But in terms of why this is a chapbook and why that's a full collection, is that the heart of this is one long serial poem. And I think there's just a tighter thread here, whereas Working Hypothesis, although there are themes, it strays from those themes quite a bit more than the chapbook does.
Great. Thank you. We have two more questions, one for Jessica and one for Charlie. And they're from the chat. This next one is for Jessica from Gabriella. I have a question. Are the lines about the gates of childhood clanging shut and seeing someone waving from your childhood home a nod to the book A Tree Grows in Brooklyn?
That's so interesting. So it's actually there. It is referential. It's not from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, but the idea of using the iron gate as a metaphor actually comes from Anne Sexton and her poem "The Truth the Dead Know," which was a poem that she wrote after her mother and father died very closely together. And she wrote a kind of poem about the funeral procession. And she makes a reference there, something about the sea swings in like an iron gate. It's not that reference that was interesting to me, though. There's a line in her poem, and she was a great confessional poet with Sylvia Plath, with Robert Lowell, this sort of, with Jean Valentine, the same kind of group of poets, that she says, "It is June and I am tired of being brave." And that's a moment that I always think of in writing, because it's like, you think, you know what, it's okay to just say it, just say what you mean. And so in that poem, I use that reference of the iron gate because I want to convey that, like, sometimes I just want to say I'm lonely, or I'm unhappy, or something happened. And so it's kind of a note to that. So it's interesting that you picked up on that. It's not that reference, but it is a reference to another great confessional poet who I admire very much, Anne Sexton.
Great. So Charlie is going to answer two questions, kind of fold them in to each other. One asking about his process in writing a poem. Is he more focused on the scientific and natural aspect, or more personal? And that combined with a question from Sylvia asking him, how do we become more sensitive to the expressions of natural history? How can we as humans better join all of its history as opposed to human/natural? Charlie.
Yeah, I think there's a real sort of connection between these two, like things that are deeply personal and these poems that maybe seem less personal or more interested in science. One of the things I really hope to do in the working hypothesis is to take these scientific ideas and these sort of dry encyclopedic things and bring them into our interpersonal relationships, bring them into a romantic conversation with a beloved, with a friend, with a family member, into maybe trouble the scientific with the personal, and go both ways. So in terms, Anya's question was a little bit about process. How do they come? Specifically with that question, I met my first Eastern Dobson fly when I was a camp counselor leading kids up and down the Slippery Rock River, and we almost squished it. And it was huge and startling and beautiful and weird. And we were with a naturalist who was able to tell us all of this stuff about it. And so for me, the experience of that thing in the world isn't too different from the elements of a poem like Resume, where everything is a thing that happened. And so even if it's mythical or somewhat fabricated, I tried to connect it to something lived. And I think that's what Sylvia's question a little bit like this: how do we become more sensitive to these things? How do we understand these expressions? How do we think about this sort of divide between the human and the natural? And I think the only answer I have to that is to be outside. Just to be in the world and to engage your senses, and that then infuels whatever process you have, and it troubles whatever you think you know. And so I've spent a lot of time dirty and muddy and playing in the woods, perhaps as an adult, perhaps looking like a fool, and that's where I blur that line all the time, is to remember that I'm an animal and to sort of feel what my animal feels in the world, and to then make those connections, to blur those boundaries. I hope that makes sense. Certainly something we can talk more about in a future thing.
Wonderful. I
Hey,
just
David.
want to, yeah, your mom's comment. Can you comment on that? It's too rich, too good to leave. It's a great ending to the night. Is that what you're thinking, Jessica?
I was thinking the same thing, and thank you, because my mom says it's my dad's question.
Yes.
Rob Jewell, who is a retired Kent State professor of journalism.
And I met Rob when he volunteered at the Wick Poetry Center. Yeah.
All the history. It's all the synchronicities, right?
Yeah.
I can say that, I think it's been an incredible 2 days for poetry. I think Amanda, and please, everyone speak to this. Gorman's poem yesterday was the perfect for the occasion. It was inspirational. It touched the moment and what we needed at the time. And I think the fact that we wake up this morning and every news station is talking about poetry shows what we all know is true, which is poetry is important. Words matter. Of course, the humanity should be funded. And I think that's this administration's goal. But what a wonderful moment for poetry in this country.
Yeah, I might add on that and quote director David Hassler. And it might be David, you can tell us later if this is an original, but you will often sort of say, why not poetry? And so, when we're thinking, how do we get children to care about the natural world and about the environment? Maybe have them write a poem about it. When we want to help us understand where we are in the arc of our democracy, why not listen to a poet? We want people to understand what healthcare providers are going through on the front lines. Why not have them write about it and share that? And to me, that's a big part of the Wick ethos. And so I think, when there was tears of joy and excitement and legitimate being moved by Gorman's poem, I think it's because what she was saying and how she was handling that occasion resonated and sort of set a standard for what we hope to do when we're doing our work at its absolute best. So thank you, Mr. Jewell, for that comment, and David for allowing me to plagiarize you.
Well, the beautiful thing about poetry, as Naomi Shihab says, it's an ongoing conversation. And that quote, Charlie, comes from our city manager, David Roller. When I was meeting with him 4 or 5 years ago to get the city's support of our NEA River Stanzas proposal. And I said, we had this idea to do river stanzas, which you then came in to execute. And he said, David, you don't need to sell this on me. We've been failing as a society to talk to one another in a meaningful way and to hear voices of the other. Why not poetry? And the minute he said that in that meeting, I've been saying it ever since.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one.
It's a good one. So thank you for such a rich evening. I want to end just by sharing a litany of the upcoming reading. I won't go into detail, but I really have to read this. It's so exciting. The upcoming readings and workshops that we're offering this semester. All of them can be found on events.travelingstanzas.com, where you can register both for the community writing workshops with visiting writers and sign up for the readings, or you can find the full schedule on our website under the reading series. But without dwelling on any one of them, I want to just read what's coming up in the sort of themes and topics that they are covering to strengthen our community, to meet needs in our community and in our democracy. Right off the bat, coming up in February 12th and 19th, will be 2 open writing workshops called Black Voices Matter, led by 2 wonderful Kent State student teaching artists, Dorisha Hendricks from the Wick Poetry Center and Khalil Cage. Followed, there'll be an open mic then on February 26th. Then we're bringing Darren Damari to give a writing workshop on empathy and action, finding creativity after addiction. And he'll read then, that will be on February 10th at 5:30, and then at 7 o'clock on the 10th that evening, he'll be reading from his beautiful book of poems about the opioid addiction crisis. Then Charlie will be leading workshops in conjunction with the Gerald Reed Center for International and Intercultural Education called Untranslatable, an ode to the mother tongue. And this is in anticipation of the International Mother Tongue Day, and inviting participants from all over the world to take these workshops and then to post their poems as well, both in their mother tongue language and in English. The workshop February 11th at 5, and then another one on February 24th at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard, and then an open mic reading on the 19th at 7 o'clock. Then we'll be bringing Padre Otuma, who is an Irish poet and a theologian and a conflict resolution advocate, a wonderful poet who now does Krista Tippett's Poetry Unbound podcast for the On Being series. And he'll be doing a workshop, Writing What We Notice, on March 17th and a reading on March 18th from his incredible work. And then we're bringing back our beloved Naomi Shihab on April 7th, who will be giving a workshop for the community at 5:30, and then that evening at 7 o'clock giving a reading. And then Charlie's wonderful outreach class, teaching poetry in the schools, will culminate with an online first ever performance called Giving Voice on April 27th, featuring the Kent State undergraduate teaching artists who will be going out into the community online, leading writing workshops under Charlie's guidance and mentorship. That's our spring semester. And there'll be more things that we'll be announcing through our social media and through our Wick e-news. You can sign up for that newsletter on our website or on any of our email signatures and receive that information. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, but especially I want to thank Dr. Jessica Jewell and Charlie Malone for giving such an inspiring and heartfelt reading this evening. Thank you all. And
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.